it's talking about legacy. We've mentioned a few times that this is the bloodiest battle in American history.
Right.
In just over 23,000 casualties just at the Battle of Antietam alone.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize this, but the Battle of South Mountain it's more casualties than the first Battle of Bull Run.
Right.
So it in itself
bloody.
is a big battle.
Yes.
But all of this is for a reason, and beyond just stopping Lee's northern invasion, there is a motivation behind why Lincoln needs a victory. He needs a victory, one, to secure, the midterm elections.
Yes.
But there's something even greater than that that's on the horizon. And what is that?
Okay. So Lincoln is very, very clear. He's fighting this war in 1861, 1862 to save the Union. He's getting a lot of... Now, he's an abolitionist. He does not believe in slavery. And he's getting a lot of pressure to free the slaves. But he won't do it. And he's very clear, this fight is to preserve the Union. They're not going to break apart on my watch. And Frederick Douglass and others are very unhappy with him because he's not taking action. Well, what happens is it's the story of the Emancipation Proclamation is a fascinating one, and there's all these sidelights. And I might not be right on this. You're going to get Brad Gottfried's interpretation of the Emancipation Proclamation, why this is the turning point of the Civil War. Some will say it's Vicksburg. Some will say it's the Wilderness and Overland Campaign. Some will say Gettysburg. And I'll say, nope. It's this one. And it's because of the Emancipation Proclamation. And I don't think that initially the Emancipation Proclamation was all about slavery. I think it was all about keeping the country together. And the story really begins during the summer of 1862 when Lincoln, and he'd probably been thinking about this for a while, he comes to the cabinet, he says, I got this idea. I'm going to issue this proclamation that's going to free the slaves in states in rebellion.
Because there's still a handful of slave states that are
Maryland,
in the Union.
Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, but they stayed with the Union. And he knew that if he abolished slavery in their states, they would side with the Confederacy. He'd lose
and he
those.
couldn't afford that.
He could not afford that. In fact, it's interesting. I think it was earlier in 1862. I think it was Indiana. No, it was Missouri. Missouri, I believe that was a state, said, we want to raise a regiment of African-American soldiers. Will you accept them into the military? He says, no, because I might get 1,000 guys, but I'm going to lose the whole state. It's not worth it. Keep those guys. And so what happens then is this Emancipation Proclamation will not affect any northern states, Maryland, Delaware, etc. He brings it to the cabinet. The cabinet is shocked. They had no idea he's even considering this. And they said, this looks like a death. We're doing this like a death grasp because we're losing every battle we're fighting in the East. You've got to wait until a major Union victory, preferably in the North. And this is it. And so 5 days after, he's going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But it's not the Emancipation Proclamation. On the 22nd of September, he issues the preliminary. Now, it's essentially a war order. It's a executive order. How many executive orders has Biden, has Trump, has Obama, has Bush put out that were preliminary?
Countless.
Yeah, lots and lots.
Especially amongst all of them. That's countless.
No, none.
What preliminary? I guess I misunderstood. They've put out executive orders,
and
but not preliminary.
There's no preliminaries. They're all enacted. I sign it, done.
Signed, yeah.
This is preliminary.
Is he testing the waters, kind of?
And so this is
he's
my
smart,
perspective.
isn't he?
I think so.
I'd
So
say.
essentially, he says to the South, "Listen, guys, I've got this Emancipation Proclamation. I haven't. It's only preliminary now. It's not the rule of the land, but you have the rest of September, October, November, December to come back into the Union. if you come back into the Union before January 1st, 1863, when I'm going to sign the real one, you're not in rebellion. You can keep your slaves. What do you think?
He's trying to entice. Listen.
I didn't know any of that.
Shelby Foote, very famously in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary, says that there's two geniuses that were developed in the Civil War.
Yes.
One being Nathan Bedford Forrest, which tactically, I guess you could say that he is that. I mean, he's a character that could have his own episode all to his lonesome.
Yes.
But Lincoln is truly a genius.
There is no question about it. The more you read about Lincoln, the more impressed you become.
I'm just floored by him. Doing this podcast, I knew a good bit about him already. I mean, more than the average bear. But I started getting into Lincoln. Lincoln. The years before he's elected as president, and what watching him develop into this politician that he becomes, and then how he, I'll put it to you this way: George Washington is an incredible president. Simply, if you were to cut everything else away that he did, and you just solely went off the fact that he had the foresight to only do 2 terms and give up the position. Brilliant. And for that, he is forever going to be one of the greatest American presidents.
Yes.
Because he set the standard.
Yes,
he set the
he
tone.
certainly did.
And if he didn't, he would have just become another king, right? But even that, he doesn't even come close to Lincoln, because what Lincoln had to do, the country had torn itself apart, and he had to somehow manage to put it back together, and simultaneously deal with, the biggest blemish, or even to be more accurate, the biggest crime against humanity that America had committed that wasn't dealt with in the Revolution.
Right.
He had to deal with that simultaneously.
Right.
And he did it. I don't think there's another human being that's lived before, during, or after Lincoln that could have done it the way Lincoln did it.
And you think about how he was vilified during his life. He was made fun of. He was folksy. He was ugly.
Always
he was
trying to tell
ungainly,
jokes, stories and jokes.
Yes.
And
Unpresidential. And it had to affect him, but he never really showed it. And there are stories of Lincoln being snubbed by McClellan, personally.
when him and Seward show up at McClellan's house early on in the war, and McClellan doesn't even come down to see him.
He snubs him. And yet the only thing he said is, in the future, McClellan will come to me. But that was it. And it never showed. If it were me, you're fired.
Yeah. Oh, I would have had no. If I was Lincoln, I would have fired McClellan long before he did.
But he needed McClellan.
He did need.
He
McClellan.
needed the good McClellan.
And McClellan, we've already said this. There's things that McClellan did for the Army of the Potomac that no one else could have done, and he deserves credit where credit is
There's no question
due.
about that. Army after First Bull Run was a mess, and to make an army the way he created this army of almost 130,000 men. And, I do sympathize with him. If I spent my blood and sweat and toil trying to get this army, this beautiful army that, you sit there and you watch them march along, they're being paraded by. Do I want to take them into battle and destroy what I've created? I could understand being very reluctant.
I could too. And he almost had like this relationship. He was fatherly to his army.
They loved this man.
And they would, cheer, and he shows up on his horse. But unfortunately, being an army commander, you have to be able to separate that.
And he couldn't. Although Second Bull Run, at Antietam, I think he realized either he has to or he loses everything. And it just, he just could not do what, I don't think any man could have done what Lincoln wanted.
No, I don't.
Done.
I mean,
only Grant could have done it.
Only Grant, and probably at that point, who knows? Grant might not have been able to do what Lincoln wanted at that point.
Not at that point.
Because he still had some learning to do too.
Oh, he did. And Vicksburg taught him so much about tenacity, and flexibility and the like. And it's.
Lincoln also is dealing with just a year before this, he lost his son. and his
Yes.
wife is
Yes.
losing her mind.
Yes.
And he's still dealing with that at this time.
And he's already lost his son Edward in 1850.
Before his presidency.
Yes.
So Lincoln, for instance, when his son does die, Willie dies,
Mhm.
I think he takes the afternoon to go to the funeral, and the next morning he's back at work.
That's right.
That's unfathomable to me.
I agree.
I couldn't imagine that.
I can't either.
And yet Lincoln, not only is he this just brilliant leader and
Yes.
brilliant politician, and in the way he, we were talking the other day about how certain people know how to address people to get the reaction they want.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody in the history of America that's been as good at that as Lincoln is.
Oh, there's no question about that.
So we got off on a side tangent there, but I just find
Okay,
Lincoln
yeah.
so fascinating. It's hard not to sit there and talk about him.
But even thinking about the Gettysburg campaign, he's lost 2 sons. His baby Tad is on his deathbed with smallpox, and he's still coming to Gettysburg, despite having lost 2 sons and having a wife that's furious with him, because he had to cement this Union sentiment. We've got to continue this fight. These men did not die in vain. We can't loosen up. We've got to continue. And that he put the country above his own personal family and his own personal feelings. And that's special.
It is special.
Yes.
That is it's hard to find someone that, because they say absolute power corrupts.
Yes, not for him.
Not for him.
Not
He
for
is
him.
he is the exception to that, and he
Right.
took his role as commander in chief and
Yes.
as the guiding light for the country in its darkest hour.
Mhm.
He took the responsibility of that very, very seriously.
No question.
So getting back to the Emancipation Proclamation,
Yes.
the legacy that it has with the Battle of Antietam. and the campaign.
Okay. So the key to the Emancipation Proclamation is that January 1st, 1863 rolls around. None of the southern states take advantage of Lincoln's offer. They are not coming back into the Union. They're keeping their slaves. Heck with it. And then something happens that I'm not clear about. And that is the war had started and had gotten to this point because it was a war to keep the country together. It wasn't a war to abolish slavery. But after this, it all shifted. It became a war to abolish slavery. And I've written a couple books. One is Stopping Pickett, the history of the Philadelphia Brigade. Another's Kearny's Own, the history of the 1st New Jersey Brigade. And you look at letters, you look at diaries, you look at what these soldiers were writing when they found out about the Emancipation Proclamation. And they're angry because they're saying, we did not enlist to free these blankety blanks. We enlisted to keep the country together. And now you've shifted goals on us. Now think about this. England and France, they're this close to recognizing the South. They've freed their slaves decades before. Are they going to morally be able to close their eyes to slavery? Oh, we can't have it, but we are going to be helping a country, I don't know if you want to call it a country, but an area of the United States that wants to be free to keep their slaves.
Good point.
And at that point, and I always ask people, could we have won the American Revolution without France's help?
No,
No.
we could not have.
Now, could the South have prevailed? It's possible, but not militarily. More, it would have been Union sentiment saying, done.
It would have been essentially every loss in a major conflict that the U.S. has suffered has been as a result of the populace, the public populace's demand for the war to end.
Right. That's indeed.
That's
right.
the only way that the Confederacy would have won.
That's correct. And they got close, but ultimately it didn't happen. And so, but if England and France had come in on the side of the Confederacy, the first thing they would have done was killed the blockade. And then, broker a peace, what does that mean? I wouldn't be surprised if at least English troops were not fighting right next to Lee's army. And I don't think the typical American wanted to see that kind of war escalating.
No, I mean, that would have been catastrophic if France and England would have recognized the Confederacy as a sovereign nation.
Yes.
That would have been a catastrophic thing to have happen.
Yes.
And you were saying earlier that you kind of get a lot of pushback on calling this the turning point, because a lot of people do consider either Gettysburg or Vicksburg to be the turning point of the war. I
Right.
would say the overwhelming majority of people say that, and maybe tactically, or strategic / tactically, yes. But in the grand scheme of things, I agree with you. The war shifts after Antietam due to the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yes.
Because of that, it switches the purpose, the Union's purpose, its goal at the end of the day. It shifts that from preservation of the Union
That's
to
right.
freeing
Right.
freeing slaves.
That's right. And as part of it, there's going to be over 100,000 African Americans able and will join. I think it's actually closer to 200,000 that will join the Union forces. The preliminary didn't have that. And so now you have African Americans joining, and that certainly helped the war effort as well. So that's why not only is this the bloodiest one-day battle in American history, but it also is going to be what essentially is going to be the beginning of the end of the Confederacy.